Farmageddon is one more week closer, and it's time to talk wide receivers. Which group is ready to go for Dublin? Right here on this college crossover of Farmageddon Friday.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, hit that beat. It's a college crossover, Locked On College Crossover with Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Cyclones. Christian Rauh here with Nick Maravetz, bringing you talk about the best rivalry in college football, Farmageddon Friday. Nick, we talked last week, running backs getting ready to week 0, Dublin. It's going to be an exciting game. National spotlight, no other game on. It's the first game of the college football season. We've talked quarterbacks in the past. We're going right down the line in this one, and we're going to talk wide receivers in this one. And we got a bone to pick at the end of this episode because I think the Big 12 made a huge mistake between the two of our teams when it comes to the scheduling. Before we do that, though, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Nick, the wide receiver room, I have a huge question for you, and I'm sure that it's a big question that you've had on your show this entire offseason. You have two 1,000-yard receivers to replace in 2025. Rocco Becht obviously returning. That's a huge step. But who's Rocco Becht going to throw to in your wide receiver room when you don't have guys like Higgins and Noel, who are both with the Houston Texans? Two 1,000-yard receivers no longer there. That's a huge concern. I don't think you can overstress the shoes you have to fill for the Cyclones receiver room.
I agree. I don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but one thing is clear. There is a large gap in production as far as what's missing from last year from Higgins and Noel. Like, those two were, bar none, the best wide receiver duo in the entire country, not the Big 12, not on Iowa State, in the entire country. 1,100 yards each. That is the only duo to complete, or to do that, I suppose, last season. To not have that it's going to be different. I don't know if it'll be worse this year or better. It could be better, but it will be different. Now, to answer that question, there are a few guys that are going to fill that hole. Now, to just give you a few names right off the bat, Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend are the two transfers in the transfer portal that Iowa State acquired this offseason, through the transfer portal, of course, that are kind of similar as far as stature goes to Higgins and Noel. Chase Sowell, 6'4", 195, and Xavier Townsend, 5'11", 185. Very similar to what Higgins and Noel were. Higgins being that kind of deep threat, big body, and Noel being the little smaller kind of slot guy. Now, I will make a very clear statement here. Sowell and Townsend have made it clear they are not Higgins and Noel. They are going to be their own kind of duo, which I love. I am a big fan of that. But I do think that as far as personnel, when you look at it from an X's and O's, numbers on a stat sheet, what Noel Pauly and Mauser are working with here is similar to what they had last year. So I think that is promising. The exit of Isaiah Alston was a shock to me, and it was something that I was certainly not super fond of, but I do think that Eli Green and Brett Eskelson are two other names you should look out for on the Iowa State roster. Brett Eskelson being a guy, obviously not a ton of playing time. We haven't seen his name called a whole lot, but he's been a guy throughout spring training now that it's kind of long gone at this point. But it was a guy that it was mentioned over and over and over how well he was performing in practice and his first in, last out kind of mentality. So I'm high on Eli Green. Brett Eskelson is a guy that seems like the team is extremely favorative towards. But I do think Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend will fit the model that Higgins and Noel laid out last year, and it won't be too far off of what we're used to.
Is this more of a wide receiver 1A, 1B conversation, or do you think we're going to see a true wide receiver 1 for Iowa State this year? And if so, who is it going to be of those potential transfer portal additions?
I do think the way I'm looking at it right now is it's Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend kind of in that upper tier. And then Eli Green and Brett Eskelson and co, it's yet to be proven. It doesn't mean they can't. I just want to see it first before I make any statements. As far as 1A, 1B, I'm kind of two ways here. It could be truly a 1A, 1B like we had last season. Maybe we have two wide receivers who go for over 1,000 yards yet again, which would be insane. And does that lead to 10 wins? Most likely. I mean, realistically, with the Cyclones, that's what you're going to get. The other option, though, is that I wonder if Xavier Townsend ends up being kind of the guy because of his versatility. We have heard a lot about Xavier Townsend being used in the slot, in the run game, in motion. I think this guy can really kind of move around and widen the horizons of this offense, kind of expand the possibilities. And I wonder if maybe he's not necessarily a 900-yard wide receiver through the passing game, but maybe like 1,300 all-purpose, right? So maybe like 600 and 700, like just something insane, something we haven't really seen a whole lot of at Iowa State. Of course, we've seen a little bit of it, but not quite to this extent, where he's a staple part of the offense, but not necessarily only through the passing. And that's the way I see it. It could be Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend, 1A, 1B, like what we saw last year. But we've heard a lot about Xavier Townsend and his versatility. I think that could be something we have to pay attention to that. That would be super exciting.
Well, it sounds like you're focusing more on the all-purpose side, which is not a big deal, and it could be a blessing in disguise as well. But does that make you feel like you probably won't get a 1,000-yard receiver on Iowa State this year, a team that last year had two of them?
I actually, this sounds negative, but I don't think we will. I don't think we'll have a 1,000-yard wide receiver because of the fact that we'll have a much more senior, if you will, running back room in Carson Hansen and Abu Sama. And then, as I mentioned last week, River Peppers, a guy that was mentioned by Matt Campbell in the passing game.
Great name.
Sweet name. That's another passing option for the Cyclones. Then we've got the tight end room, which we have yet to talk about. But a lot of guys returning from injury. Cooper Alexander, a guy that could really turn some heads in the passing game as well. And then on top of that, the versatility of Xavier Townsend. If things play out the way that I do, I don't know if we'll get a 1,000-yard wide receiver just because of the fact that we're probably going to have a very balanced attack through the air. And then you add on that running back room and the added experience on the ground. The way I'm looking at this is not Higgins is down there somewhere, just throw it into the air. It's what is the progression? Is it Sowell, Townsend in motion, option read, not there. We're going to drop to Peppers. Next play, okay, we've got a flag out of Cooper Alexander. Like, there's so many options with what we're seeing as far as roster goes from this team. I don't know if we'll have a 1,000-yard wide receiver because we'll probably have 7,000 yards split across 8 guys. It could be something like that.
It sounds like it's fair to say that it's probably going to be a little bit more run heavy in 2025 for Iowa State, just based on the expertise and the veteranship in that room and the question marks, at least early, the question marks around the wide receiver room. I think that's a fair assumption, but there's going to be moments, as in every team, in every game, where it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, and you have to throw. Who is that guy that Rocco Becht is going to be looking at? Who is going to be that number one target, that guy he's going to be able to trust more than anybody else in those type of situations?
I think it's yet to be seen, but the first answer that comes to mind is Chase Sowell because of his size. Huge guy, huge catch radius, the possibility to make a play at, short distance, whether it's a comeback or a dig versus downfield, maybe beats guy one-on-one, just able to go up over the top, something like that kind of guy. Obviously, a lot of options, just gives Rocco Becht more possibility to succeed, more situations in which he's successful. However, the other factor I'd like to just toss in here, kind of like a little grain of salt, Xavier Townsend and Rocco Becht, friends. The chemistry is there. The kind of similarity that I've drawn, I guess, I don't know if I'm phrasing that correctly, but Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, right? That duo was, it's unbelievable. I mean, Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams ended up on the Jets together simply because of their relationship. I think we're going to see something there with Xavier Townsend and Rocco Becht, the friendship, the chemistry. I wonder if Chase Sowell is maybe not that 1A, tiers above everybody else, if Xavier Townsend ends up being that guy, literally just because of trust and relationship factor as opposed to size and possibility.
We've learned a lot in the past about college football, especially in these programs, the new world of NIL and transfer portal, you name it. Chemistry is something that doesn't go away. So that could be something that an underlying thing. If you're one of those folks that play this new thing, it's kind of new, college football, fantasy football, which is insane to me. I can't do it. I can't get into it, but it could be an under the radar pick, maybe Townsend in that one. All right, let's flip the script. Let's talk about Kansas State's wide receiver room, because I think this depth is something that could be worth talking about. We'll do that next on this college crossover of Locked On Kansas State, Locked On Cyclones. It's Farmageddon Friday. But first, Nick, we got to talk about today's sponsor, and that's Monarch Money. And I got to know if you've ever checked your bank account, and did you ever wonder where did all your money go? Have you ever wondered that?
Every day. Every day.
Well, between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, maybe celebrating a significant other's birthday party, maybe even buying a house, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. No, it's not. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, spending all in one place. So if you have to buy that ice for your ice bath, Monarch Money can track that for you. You don't need another app. You don't have to worry about that. They can take care of it. When I first started using Monarch Money, I realized just how much money I was spending on food delivery. I don't do that anymore. Thank you, Monarch Money, for telling me how bad that was. It adds up, but you don't even realize it. So it helped me take control of my finances. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year.
If Kansas State is going to be as good as everyone thinks they're going to be next season, everyone thinks that this is a Big 12 championship level team, odds-on favorite. I don't see it, but it seems like everybody does. One thing is for certain. Their wide receiver room has to step up in comparison to last year. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of elements to this Kansas State team that look promising, but looking at what Kansas State accomplished last year through the air, I don't know if I'm blown away. I don't think my socks are 6 feet away. I'm pretty sure they're actually still entirely on my feet. So Christian Rauh, blow me away and tell me why this wide receiver room this year will be different.
Well, first of all, it was at the first of your beginning. It was Kansas State. Everybody knows Kansas State's going to be. Then Nick Maravetz took himself out of the everybody conversation. So it's not Kansas State versus everybody. It's just Kansas State versus Nick Maravetz moving forward here. Look, you're not wrong. There was an issue when it came to Kansas State's wide receiver room. I think that's a fair assumption last year. And they still found a way to be 7-1. And then the wheels fell off against Houston, and then it all just ended. And I don't think we have to go even farther than that. I think I've made myself clear, even on Farmageddon Fridays with you and me on these shows. The wide receiver room was subpar. It absolutely was subpar last year. They have to find a way to improve. The best part about it, their number one receiver from last year, Jace Brown, stayed. He did not enter the transfer portal. There was thoughts that he would enter the portal. I mean, we were talking about him potentially leaving before the Rate Bowl against Rutgers. There was talk about it. He squashed it before the game. Thankfully, that happened. He sticks around. But not only is he returning, because you mentioned about possibly having a guy that can be high in all-purpose yards. I think Jace Brown can be that guy as well. We saw some jet sweeps out of him in the Rate Bowl game with Matt Wells, the new offensive coordinator. Some real exciting stuff I think Jace Brown is going to have this year. I think he's going to be one of the top players yet again. 1,000-yard receiver. Was he a 1,000-yard receiver last year? I don't even have the stats pulled up. He was dang close. 823. That's right. I don't think he hits the 1,000 yards. But the biggest question is, Iowa State had 2 1,000-yard receivers. I think Kansas State can have 2 800-yard receivers in 2025. And I think that's a fair thing to say because some of these transfer portal guys are interesting. When you look at Jared Bradley, who came over from Texas Tech, and from Boston College, was with Boston College last year, has Big 12 experience, though, with Texas Tech. He's interesting. He's really fun to watch. Nothing but good things talked about him in spring ball, and as well as Jaren Tibbs, who came over from Purdue. Now, Purdue wasn't a great team last year, but he was probably one of the shining spots on Purdue in 2024. They're going to deliver deep threat targets for Avery Johnson on the spot, and that is something that is going to help with the success of not only just Avery Johnson, but this offense. You talk about this entire offense, who was very good in the red zone last year, which we're going to get into more next week because that's more of a tight end conversation. But if you add the size of this wide receiver room now with those red zone threats, with the running backs I talked about last week who have some good short yardage situations, I think you're in a really good spot to be a threat once you get inside the 20-yard line. Now, can you get there? That's the biggest question, and that will all rely on Avery Johnson. I know this is a wide receiver talk, but you got to make sure the guy throwing it to those wide receivers can get the ball to you. There were some inaccuracies last year Not going to lie about that. I think you got to be transparent when you come to these conversations. But look, when you have 6'4", 6'5" wide receivers, that inaccuracy gets a lot smaller. Your target share gets a lot bigger. The size of you throwing at and the radius of those arms, those wingspans, Nick, they get a lot bigger. So those errors naturally are going to go away just as long as the timing is there. And I think Avery Johnson is going to take a nice step forward. So I really like what this first unit is going to produce. Now, last week, I talked about how impressive the depth of the running back room was. I don't feel that great about the depth from the wide receiver room. I like the first three. I like Brown. I like Bradley. I like Tibbs. I like the speed, the size. The second unit makes me question, is there enough if there's an injury, if there's something like that can get the job done? Kansas State has had these woes over the last few years when it comes to transfer portal wide receivers. Can they get out of that hump? And if so, is it enough to make sure that they're at the top of the Big 12? That'll be the biggest question that I think we have heading into the season.
Okay, so you mentioned the 800 yards for the top two wide receivers for Kansas State, and you mentioned kind of getting to the red zone. My first question then is, what is Kansas State going to do differently to not only get into the red zone and score, which is really the end game of football, like that's the ultimate goal, score more points than your opponent, but to get to that 800 yards for the top two wide receivers? Because looking at last year, it goes from 823 down to 359, 258, 236. Looking at Iowa State with two 1,100-yard wide receivers, you go 1111, 296, 179. So kind of in that same realm, but with two 1,100-yard wide receivers. I'm just curious, what do you think Kansas State will do differently, maybe between the 20s? I guess you could go all the way back to their one, realistically, because not too much is going to change there. A little bit will. But what is Kansas State going to do differently? Do we have different personnel out on the field to open up different possibilities here?
You got to be successful in all phases of the offense there. And I think that comes into play with Matt Wells taking over the primary and sole offensive coordinator, responsibilities. Dylan Edwards is going to be a threat at running back. His speed, his off tackle, it's just dangerous. And I think if they find a way to make him successful early, which I think will always be the plan, is to get the run game successful as early as possible. I think that's the majority of most programs' plans. Why wouldn't you not want that to happen? You can control the clock. You control basically everything if you control the run. But if you do that, you're going to push defenders in the box. That's going to open up play action, which with dual threat Avery Johnson, that's an entirely different scary scenario for any defense, not just Iowa State. And then you have those 6'4", 6'5" receivers and Jace Brown on the outside. I think that's where the big time plays get in. I think you take more chances because you have more confidence in Avery Johnson in year 2 as a starter, not being afraid to throw that deep ball, knowing that you have, as you mentioned with Higgins and Noel, but you have 6'4", 6'5" receivers down there somewhere. Just throw it. Just make it happen. And I think that you're going to have that type of more of a risk factor, if you will. I am not going to shy away from the fact that I think that this offense is going to be more explosive, more riskier. Does it mean that there might potentially be more turnovers? Yes, probably. That's just how you play. You live by the blitz, die by the blitz. That happens with the same thing on the offensive side. So I think, and putting it all together, your question in this long form answer here, I think you have to be more aggressive to make sure that you get your wide receivers fed more. And if these top 3 receivers stay healthy, I think you find at least 2 of them with at least 800 yards when it's all said and done.
Well, more risk means more reward, allegedly, or at least there is a chance for it. I do wonder if Kansas State can get it done through the air. Avery Johnson seems like a very high-level prospect, a guy that could turn some heads and turn into that top 5 quarterback that everyone thinks he is. I don't know if I necessarily agree, but he's definitely in that conversation. I don't know if it'll happen against Iowa State, but week 1, week 2, week 3, I'm sure Kansas State will figure it out. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about something absolutely preposterous. I cannot believe we are going to break this down, but it's coming up right after this.
Welcome on back to Farmageddon Friday here on this Locked On College crossover, Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Cyclones for the first time since 1916. Was that Frozen in there? Did you just
just
me
keep
with
it moving?
Frozen?
Let's keep it moving. Let's just go ahead.
I have
keep
a 3-year-old, and this is my one time to and I got Frozen on Locked On. Come on, bro.
Oh shoot! Yeah, I had to. I had to.
On with the chlorophyll. Okay, for the first time since 1916, Kansas State and Iowa State are not guaranteed to play twice in one season for the college basketball season for the men's basketball moving forward. The Big 12 announced their schedule release for the conference, and Iowa State will only travel to Manhattan this year. Maybe they were scared because Kansas State beat them in Ames. Maybe that was the case. Maybe.
Is that what?
But Iowa State will only go to Manhattan. Kansas State will not head to Ames. And that's an interesting move. I don't like it. I don't think you should ever get rid of the fact that Iowa State playing Kansas State. We already know that Farmageddon's streak on football side is going to end in 2027. What is Brett Yormark doing here? He dropped the ball. What happened?
It doesn't make any sense to me. And this is something we have kind of been looking at for a couple of years now. I don't remember how long ago it was, but I remember seeing that I think it was the next 4 seasons, 24, 5, 6, and 7, the 4 seasons of Iowa State, I guess Iowa State football opponents was dropped, and Kansas State wasn't in 2027. And I, just like everyone else, was extremely upset. Where did Farmageddon go? One of the best rivalries in all of sports, arguably, kind of fading away. Now, granted, they will still play each other, throughout the course of time, but it won't be the streak that lives on. To move to the basketball side, I agree. What are we doing? I mean, Iowa State, Kansas State, you never know what is going to happen. Last season, you'd mentioned Kansas State coming in to Hilton Coliseum and the just devastating loss that Iowa State suffered. Coming off of Caleb Love's shot at Arizona, you kind of felt like this is not that bad. This is a wild loss for Iowa State. It'll be fine. We'll move on. It's not the end of the world. Then you break, or I suppose you, meaning Kansas State, breaks Iowa State home win streak 80-61. I mean, just destroyed all heart that Iowa State had, it felt like. I think that was a pivotal loss in the season. And I don't know for sure if you can pinpoint one moment, but I feel like if I were to pick one, that would be at least in the top conversation. Why? Because I have said over and over and over just how important rivalries are in sports. Iowa versus Iowa State for so many years was lopsided. One team better than the other, didn't matter. Level playing field, whether it was Jack Trice or Kinnick Stadium, it was going to be a tight game. Same thing with Iowa State and Kansas State. Farmageddon, always going to be a top tier game due to the added kind of aspect of that rivalry. I don't think Kansas State was as good as Iowa State was last year in basketball, but they beat them by almost 20 points. I don't know what Brett Yormark is doing here. This is something I think Jamie Pollard has to get on the phone, ring that Kansas State line, say, hey, let's do this on our own. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, they need to figure this one out. I don't think it's going to happen, but this is something that this needs to make sure that Iowa State and Kansas State play twice a year, every year. This is the worst year that this could possibly happen, Nick. You are putting the football teams on full display on the national market. No other team is playing in Ireland. Internationally, you're playing Iowa State and Kansas State, and then you're saying, oh, we'll just make sure they only play once during the men's basketball season. Now, flip side, women's side, they're playing both. So we're getting Farmageddon on the women's side, home and away. So there is a plus side, okay? There is a little caveat. But on the men's side, we're only getting Iowa State in Manhattan. For the record, Iowa State will play Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Baylor twice in the Big 12 play. Kansas State plays also Kansas. They play TCU and West Virginia. You can't tell me that they couldn't have swapped out TCU or West Virginia, and on your side they couldn't have swapped out Baylor or Oklahoma State. Like, come on, like it's just insane to me. Now you try to worry about with fairness. They talk about geography, and then they brought up rivalries. They put Kansas and Kansas State involved in there. I understand that, but you got to make sure you add Farmageddon to it. And they dropped the ball on that. It needs to be fixed. This better be the only year that we get this, and they better return it in 2026-27 season.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm literally looking at this, and if you factor in any sort, just pick whatever you want to talk. Like, what are we? Why?
Finally, something we can agree on.
Yeah, I agree. I just what are we doing here? I feel like it only makes sense to keep Farmageddon going. I ask you this because we haven't talked a whole lot about it. We've kind of been diving into the more technical side of the X's and O's of football rosters here on Farmageddon Friday. Do you wonder? I wonder. Do you think that this is maybe a result of kind of the changing landscape of college athletics as a whole. We talk so much about college football and the college football playoff. I think I had a 9-day streak where I talked about either the SEC media days and their relation to college football playoff or just the college football playoff in general. I mean, it's a huge topic and we're always talking about football, but basketball is also a college athletic sport, I guess. Kind of walked myself into that one. Do you think that this is kind of a result of the changing landscape? Because I don't love it if it is.
Yeah, I do. And I think it's more of them trying to go to the fairness thing. Most years, I know Kansas State have had 2 down years, but most years, Iowa State and Kansas State are towards the top of the Big 12 in men's basketball standings. I think they tried to make this more even so they could have more parity in the men's basketball division so they could hopefully get more in. I think this all stems out to the fact of West Virginia getting snubbed in the tournament last year, the fact that Kansas State obviously blew it from themselves, but was nowhere to be found. I think if you didn't have to play Iowa State in Manhattan last year, maybe you had a better resume if you would have played somebody else lower on that schedule, like a West Virginia or someone else, who was just obviously not in the same aspect of ranked Iowa State, so I think that's where it comes. I think that they ranked those priorities when they talked about all the different factors they put into play, fairness, geography, rivalries, things like that. I think the fairness one might have been more towards the top of the priority. And when they were thinking fairness, I think they were more thinking of how can we get all of these schedules to look as tough as possible so we can get as many Big 12 teams in the NCAA tournament, which means more money initially for our conference.
See, now here's what I don't like about that. And I'm not coming at you. I'm just coming at the concept as a whole here. I think Kansas State's win over Iowa State last season spoke volumes. I mean, Kansas State during that time was on an unreal streak. Like going into that game, I said, look out for Kansas State. They're very, very hot right now. Like this could be a real team. And all of a sudden they beat Iowa State. And it seems like, oh, wow, Kansas State Final Four team? Like, is that what we're seeing here? And so to kind of level out the playing field, yeah, well, that was a conversation, not me. I heard it everywhere else besides on my show. I think to level out the playing field is like, it feels like diluting the solution a little bit. And that's just my opinion. You don't necessarily have to agree. More from the angle for me, like, I want Farmageddon back. Like, why are we not bringing this back? But like for Kansas State to win that in Hilton felt huge. Like this could have been a pivotal moment for Kansas State. And the Big 12 is already so parity driven. The Big 12 is constantly flipping itself on its head. Yes, I know what Houston has done the last few years, but especially in football. Yes, I know this is basketball, but you understand where I'm coming from. That is what I think makes the Big 12 different from all the other conferences. They always say you got to be different to be better. I think the Big 12 is just it's like unreal in comparison to the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC as far as parity goes. And so to introduce kind of like man-made parity a little bit, to like try to manufacture that, it feels fake, and it's costing us Farmageddon home and away, or I guess home and home is probably the term. I don't know. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's a little bit outside of the box here? I personally think that's where it's coming from.
No, I agree completely. And I want to hear all your thoughts as well. Let us know in the comment description below what you think about the fact that the men's basketball team's only playing once, Iowa State and Kansas State this year. I'm seeing the comments all over on like Big 12 social media pages. Like the first comment I saw was, what happened to Farmageddon? That was the first comment I saw. I knew we had.
And whoever commented that has a huge brain, just so we know.
Yep. Huge brain. Huge brain. Absolutely. They had to wrap this all up to put it together. You started with Frozen. I'll end with Frozen. I'm not going to let this go. Not going to let it go.
I won't either, man. I am going to live and die by Farmageddon. It is the best rivalry in sports.
I won't hold it back anymore. Nick.
Stop, bro. You can find me at Nick_Marv on Twitter. Get me out of here, bro.
This has been a Lockdown College crossover. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll talk to you later. We could have sung Frozen.
I was literally about to start.